In a small room on the outskirts, light filters through a dusty window. A man sits in silence, motionless like a statue. On the table is a cup of cold tea. His hands tremble slightly. No one touches him, yet inside a storm is raging. He has just returned from the front lines. Not with medals nor with tales of heroism. What he brings back is an invisible monster, one that lives only in darkness, in silence, in dreams. One evening his wife hears him sobbing in his sleep, not from pain, but from guilt. In his dreams he sees the face of a child, blood and tears. He shoots, then he wakes, yet the child's face is still there, on the wall, in the mirror, inside him. Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But how can one look into the darkness when it is the very thing that breaks us? War does not only ravage land, cities, and bodies. It breaks souls. It tears apart minds. And the most brutal thing is when the soldier returns, but his soul remains imprisoned on the battlefield. Not everyone can see it, for this wound does not bleed, but it eats away from within, quietly, like a spiritual necrosis. The man in that room is not just a soldier. He is a symbol for thousands, tens of thousands who have returned, but never truly come back. And now, we must have the courage to face this truth. Not through the eyes of morality nor politics, but through the heart, through psychology, through the ancient languages of the soul that Carl Jung left behind. For only by touching their darkness can we truly understand the darkness within ourselves. War does not only create heroes, it creates shadows. The shadow, according to Carl Jung, is the unconscious part of the mind that holds what we cannot accept in ourselves. Greed, violence, hatred, desire, all repressed, buried deep in the unconscious. But when war erupts, that door flies open. The soldier is no longer an ordinary individual. He is given a superhuman power to kill, to command, to control life and death. That is when the shadow emerges, not bound by moral standards, not controlled by reason. But when the war ends, society expects the soldier to live again as a normal person, to smile, to be a husband, a father, a citizen. But how? When the shadow inside him is still screaming? Inside the soldier, another war begins. A war between the ideal self that society desires and the wild shadow newly unleashed. And if unrecognized, that shadow will find a way to return. It not only causes depression, paranoia, insomnia, it can make them a threat to others and to themselves. We call it PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But Jung would call it something else, a soul torn in two. Imagine being forced to kill, then asked to forget. You witness your best friend die beside you, then are told, "Be strong." You hear screams, see mangled bodies, and one day you sit in the kitchen, your wife asks if you want more soup. You barely hear her, because your mind is still in the bomb crater. We cannot heal this wound with pills alone, because this is not just a brain wound, this is a spiritual wound. Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Soldiers carry within them a life left behind on the battlefield. They cannot cry, cannot speak, because society is not ready to listen to the shadow. But if we do not dare to listen to the shadow, it will speak in other ways. Through violence, through suicide, through chilling silence. There is another concept we must face if we want to understand the soldier. That is the archetype, the primordial image. Figures buried deep within the collective unconscious that Jung discovered, transcending time and culture. A soldier is not just an individual, but the embodiment of the warrior archetype. This archetype holds courage, discipline, the ability to act without hesitation in danger. But it also has a dark side. When the warrior has no battlefield, he is lost. Modern society has no place for the returning warrior. No transition rituals, no welcoming embrace. And this deeply wounds the soldier's soul. In ancient cultures, those returning from war underwent purification rituals. They had to recount their stories, to cry, to be acknowledged. But today he simply comes home, with a discharge paper and a few hollow words of thanks. But the warrior still lives within him, and if this archetype is not integrated into the new life, it mutates. The warrior becomes the avenger, or worse, the victim. No one is just a single personality. Inside each of us are unlived parts, children left behind, fathers who never got to cry, soldiers who never spoke of their fear. Jung called this the inner child, and in the soldier this child is awakened by the brutality of war. It sees loved ones die. It must learn to shoot at the enemy. It is forced to be strong when its soul is breaking. But no one holds that child at night. No one says, "You can cry. You are allowed to hurt." The result? Sleepless nights, empty eyes, violent reactions to seemingly harmless sounds, a profound sense of lostness when there is no enemy, but the battle continues, with oneself. And then, in the darkness of the room, in the sixth can of beer, in the suffocating silence no one understands, the shadow begins to speak. Freud once said, "Unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways." Some soldiers end their own lives, not out of weakness, but because they have nowhere to place their shattered hearts. Some lash out at family, not out of cruelty, but because it's the only way they are heard. And some become ticking time bombs in society, because society has never given them a language to express their pain. That language is not industrialized therapy, not just antidepressants. That language is acknowledgement, sacred space, a soul-to-soul gaze. Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." But how not to become a monster when you are placed where being a monster is required to survive? This is not only the soldier's problem, it is society's problem. For society sent them to war, then turned its back when they returned. We do not just need to heal the soldier. We need to heal the collective that created war as a twisted ritual to avoid its own inner wars. War never starts at the border. It begins in the human heart. And if we do not realize that, then not just the soldier, but all of us, will continue to be slaves to our unacknowledged shadow. In the darkness of the soul, no one can walk out alone. When a soldier returns from the battlefield, he brings not only scars on his flesh, he brings back a whole world that has died, a world he was a part of, but no longer exists, and the current world has no place for him. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The soldier does not need to be defined by war, but if his pain is buried, forgotten, denied, then that wound will speak for him, not in words, but in actions, in depression, in anger, in a shattering no one sees. And then society looks at him and judges, calls him a failure, dangerous, mentally ill. But perhaps the problem is not with the soldier. Perhaps the problem lies in a society that has forgotten how to listen to pain, forgotten the sacredness of wounds, a society that worships efficiency and discards the soul. The soldier does not need pity. He needs to be seen, not as a war victim, not as a social threat, but as a human being carrying the truth of humanity, the truth that, deep down, each of us has our own war. Each of us is surviving our own private battlefields, and if we do not learn to cross the wastelands of our own souls, we will forever create wars in the outside world. The soldier is a living symbol of that. Not a political figure, not a news item, not a casualty statistic. He is the embodiment of the collective shadow, the shadow that Europe, the entire civilized world, is refusing to face. A living symbol of the cost of inner denial, of buried guilt, of untold tragedy. What can we do? We can start with honesty, honesty with ourselves, that we too have unhealed wounds, that we too have denied parts of our souls, that within each of us is a soldier and a child forced to grow up too soon. And then we can sit together, not to judge, but to listen. Listen to broken stories. Listen to unnamed nightmares. Listen to tears that need no explanation. For sometimes, A gentle gaze is enough to save a soul from the abyss. You don't need to master psychology to help heal a soldier. You just need to be present. You just need to bring your true heart to them, because the shadow only disappears in the presence of light. And perhaps the question is no longer, how can the soldier overcome? But do we have the courage to face the war within ourselves, to return together with them? If you've ever seen a man silent for too long, if you've ever felt you are fighting alone, if you've ever looked in the mirror and seen a warrior exhausted to the bone, know that you are not alone. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the guide, if you are brave enough to look. Start from there, from yourself, and then, like soul soldiers, we will return together. Not to an old world, but to ourselves. If you carry an untold story or are trying to heal after the battles of life, share it below. Be the light for others. Sometimes a single honest story can save someone from themselves. If you find value in this video, please leave a like. Subscribe to the channel to continue this healing journey, not alone but together. You are not your wound. You are the one learning to love that wound with all the courage left in your heart.